get so nervous every time I hit record because I'm awkward and it's just hard for me to amp myself up to sit here and talk to myself. And this is actually the second time that I've filmed this. I had a first take, but I just ended up deleting all of the footage intentionally because I've come to the realization that I cannot film after I've got off work because I'm just not myself. I'm really low energy and irritable, so that doesn't really make for a good, I don't know, viewing experience. I was in such a rush to get done so that I could actually do things that I wanted to do. Not that I didn't want to do this, but I didn't want to do this on the day that I did it, but I felt obligated to do it. But now I've kind of decided that I'm not going to put a huge rush on things. I'm just filming it on a Sunday. Didn't work today. I was really excited to film this video. I was in a rush to get it done the first time and I ended up not really talking about things. I also didn't really research the books that I was talking about that much, so I didn't really have a whole lot to say about them. I was basically just holding up the book and being like, saying the one or two things I knew about it. Like, for example, the first book on the list is Sorcery of Thorns, and I held it up and I was like, magical library, and then I would put it down. When I initially planned out this video, I wanted to include books, movies, and TV shows, but I didn't even end up including the things to watch during the fall because I just wanted to get it over with. I'm really excited about the books and the movies and the TV shows, all of it that I've included on this list, and I've worked hard on it, so now I'm actually excited to talk about it. I'm trying again. So obviously I'm going to start with the books because this is a book channel. So if you only want to stay for the books, you can do that. And then if you want to stay till the end of the video, there will be timestamps down below to sort of let you know where to jump to. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So as for the books, I have them separated into 3 categories. The largest category being fantasy, which I'm going to start with because fall is like fantasy to me. I read a lot of fantasy in the fall time because fantasy is a very fall genre to me. Romance is more of a summer genre, so I don't really think I have any only romance books. I have like romantasy books or books that have romance elements, but I don't have any just genuine romance books. And then the second largest category I have is mystery, thriller, horror, all like in an umbrella because I didn't have enough of each subcategory of those genres to separate it into categories, so I just combined them all into one. And then I have a really small other category which only has like 2 additional books that didn't really fit into either one of those categories that I wanted to include on this list. Okay, the first book I have on this list is Sorcery of Thorns. I'm going to try not to include too many books that other people have included on their list. I know Sorcery of Thorns is one of those books that a lot of people recommend, and I have not read it, and I didn't really know anything about it. It's been sitting on my shelves for like 4 years, and now that I have done my research and learned more about what it was about rather than just an enchanted library, I'm actually intrigued to read it. So this book is a YA fantasy, and the premise of the book is that you follow a librarian apprentice who works in an enchanted library with grimoires and things, and then a deadly incident occurs and it prompts our main character to team up with a powerful sorcerer to save the world from destruction. If that interests you, I would recommend reading this. This is not one that I've read. I would also like to say that some of the books on this list I have read and some of the books on this list I have not, so it's a recommendations as well as a TBR. I don't think that I'm going to get to all of the books that I haven't read this fall because there's so many of them, but it's just sort of a general idea. The next book on this list is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is another book that I feel like a lot of people put on their list, but I couldn't not. We follow our main character Iris, who ends up falling in love with a rival journalist, and this is set in a world where there is a war between gods going on. Her mother suffers from an addiction and her brother is missing from the front lines, and she keeps her mind occupied by writing letters to her brother and slipping them underneath the door, and then they magically disappear, and she writes the letters on a typewriter, which is a really big part in the story. I'm not really sure what. I think it might be a spoiler. A lot of people describe this book as Shadow and Bone meets lore, which I've read Shadow and Bone and I liked it, and I have lore, have not read it, but if you have read those books or if that concept intrigues you, I would recommend reading this. It also gives Tortured Poets Department vibes, and that's probably just because of the typewriter aspect. Next up, we have One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is a Fairy Loot edition. I got it in like November of 2022 when the book came out, and I had never heard of it. Nobody really talked about it, and I wasn't really that interested in the concept, so I just put it on my shelf and let it sit. And now a lot of people are reading it and enjoying it and recommending it, and this is another book that's on a lot of people's fall TBRs. So now I'm intrigued to actually read it and and there is a sequel. I'm pretty sure it's part of a duology. I never remember what the second book is called, but I think it has Tower in the name. Is it like Two Dark Towers or something? That doesn't sound right. I don't know. But what I do know is that this book is a gothic fantasy, which makes it perfect for the fall time. Our main character, Elspeth, has a monster in her head, don't we all? And our main character meets a mysterious man on a road in the forest, and this man happens to be the son, or no, the nephew of the king. The world that this story is set in is infected with dark magic, and the two of them must work together to collect 12 Providence cards in order to save the world from the dark magic that is trying to consume it. So if that sounds interesting to you, then I would recommend this book. The next book on this list is a book that I actually have read, I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago, and I would like to give it a reread because 16-year-old me was very different than 21-year-old me now. I think I might appreciate it more if I read it now, and I did actually really enjoy it when I read it, and that is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is also a special edition. This is, I believe, the 10th anniversary edition, and there is a second book out, and I think he's in the process of writing a third one, but I wouldn't hold your breath because the first book came out in 2007, and I don't think the second one was released until over 10 years later. This is more of a high fantasy book, and it's told from the perspective of our main character. If I remember correctly, our main character, I don't know how it's pronounced, I think it's like Kvothe or Kvoth or something like that, is staying overnight in an inn, and some of the people also staying in the inn are curious to hear his story because he is the most notorious wizard in the world, and he tells the story to them from his own mouth about how he became the most notorious wizard in the world. It's sort of an interesting concept because you're not hearing it from the perspective of the author, you're hearing it from the perspective of the author writing about Kvoth telling his story from his own mouth. That sounds really convoluted, but I swear like it's more simple. I just overcomplicate things. Next up we have The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. This also has a second one, and I think it's called The Night Country. I have the second one. I just, even with my glasses on, I think I need to get my prescription fixed because I can't really read it even though I'm looking at my bookshelf, and I can't read it from here because I'm blind. This is a YA fantasy mystery book, and it follows our main character Alice and her mother, who have been running from bad luck pretty much their entire lives, and their bad luck does not end when her grandmother passes away in her estate known as the Hazelwood. And her grandmother was actually the author of some dark fairy tale stories. Her mother is taken by a supernatural figure that claims to be from the world where her grandmother's stories are set in, and the only message that her mother left behind when she was taken was to stay away from the Hazelwood, which is her grandmother's estate. And then Alice ends up teaming up with a massive fan of her grandmother's stories to try to figure out how to get her mother back. Seems like a very interesting concept. YA is not a genre that I read very often, but I need to get some of them off of my shelves. And also not to mention how pretty the cover of this book is. Next up we have Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. A lot of people recommend Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, but I want to recommend Shadow and Bone, A, to be different, and B, also because I have not read Six of Crows or Crooked Kingdom, but I have read Shadow and Bone, again, like 4 or 5 years ago, and I would like to reread it before I read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, because I did really enjoy these books, but I have heard from most people that Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom are better, and they are set in the same universe. So the premise of this book is that the nation of Ravka has been torn apart by the Shadowfold, which is just like a blanket of impenetrable darkness that is like riddled with monsters that tear people apart. It follows our main character Alina Starkov, who is a cartographer for an army unit, and when this army unit is on the Shadowfold or near the Shadowfold, they end up being attacked by these monsters, and her best friend, whose name I do not remember, ends up being brutally injured, at which point she realizes that she has these powers, which if you've seen the show, read these books, read Six of Crows, you probably know what those powers entail. Regardless, she ends up saving his life, and then after these powers are found out, she's whisked away to the royal court to be trained to serve as a member of the Grisha, which is like a, I don't know, it's a group that serves the king essentially and is run by the Darkling. Next up we have Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This is another book series that I have not read, but after looking into it, I kind of knew the vague concept, but after looking into it, I'm really intrigued to read this one because it sounds really interesting. It follows our main character Kel, who is one one of the last Antari, and basically what the Antari are really rare magicians that can travel between different versions of London. So there's White London, which has no magic. There's Grey London, where magic is completely forgotten. There's Red London, which is where our main character Kel is from, which is rife with magic. Magic flourishes. And then there's Black London, which was actually consumed by magic, so it no longer even exists. Kel serves as an ambassador in Red London, and he travels back and forth between White London and Red London. And then on the side, he is a smuggler who takes on jobs from people who are desperate to see glimpses of the other Londons, because he has the power to travel between them. And then after one of his smuggling gigs goes awry, he flees to Grey London, where he runs into Delilah Bard, I think her name is. Delilah robs him, and then she saves him, and then she forces him to take her on an adventure, presumably throughout the different Londons, using his gift. Okay, next up, we have a book series that I have read and that you've probably read as well, but if you have not read, I highly recommend, and that is Lord of the Rings. This is a massive bind up of all 3 of the books that my boyfriend made me get while we were out, because this is one of the only book series that he's actually read and that he's actually enjoyed. So of course I had to read it so that we could talk about it. Now, I would feel a little bit ridiculous giving you the synopsis of this, because you've probably heard of Lord of the Rings, and if you haven't, you've been living under a rock. However, I will say that this is a very long-winded story. It's really impressive and it's really great, but it's what I would classify as a fireplace book, because it was written back in 30s or 40s during the war, when people didn't have like television or anything to keep themselves entertained. So what they would do is they would just sit and they would read for hours on end. So it's that kind of book, which is perfect for the fall time, very cozy. I'd highly recommend this book, as well as the movies. This is one of the rare cases where I actually think that the movies are better than the books. But that's not to say that the book is bad, because the book was a huge pioneer for the fantasy genre as it is today. Next up, we have Twilight, which is the series that I'm currently reading and doing a video on, because I read the first book, but then I never ended up finishing the series. And I mean, it came out like 15 years ago, and that was the height of its popularity, and I have never read it. So I thought it would be an interesting video to do, so I'm in the process of doing that right now. I won't give a synopsis on this, because I'm sure that you know what Twilight is about, and I would feel a little bit ridiculous giving you a whole synopsis on it. But yeah, this is perfect for the fall time. So if you're thinking of reading it, I would consider picking it up during the fall months. The next book on this list is The Demon King by Cinda Williams-Chima, the Seven Realms series, which is set in a world where there are 7 realms. Shocking, I know. We follow our main character, Han Alistair, who is a reformed thief, and while he's out and about, he catches a group of young punks, for lack of a better word, setting fire to Hanalea Mountain. During this confrontation, he takes an amulet away from one of the boys, who happens to be the son of the High Wizard, and he discovers that this amulet once belonged to the Demon King, who almost destroyed the world like a millennium ago. So that's a really valuable artifact, and something that this boy will probably want to take back from Han. And then our other sort of protagonist is Princess Reza, and she has just returned to the royal court after being gone for 3 years, and she aspires to be like Hanalea, which is a legendary warrior queen or something that actually ended up saving the world from the Demon King that millennium ago and killed him. She aspires to be like Hanalea, however her mother has different plans that involve a suitor, and then the 2 of them, I would assume, meet and they work together to do something. I don't know, that's just the general premise of the book. Next up, we have the Harry Potter series, which again, this is another series that I'm sure you know what it's about. I surprisingly read it for the first time last fall. I started it in October, and I kind of read them sporadically leading up to Christmas time, and it's perfect for those months. You probably know what it's about. I can't believe that I read it for the first time at the age of 20, and I wish that I had read it when I was the age demographic for this book, which I'm pretty sure that Harry Potter is middle grade. It's a little bit of an older middle grade, but so like 12, I think I would have been absolutely obsessed with these books if I had read them when I was 12. However, I did not, but I made up for it by reading it eventually, which is better than never at all. So highly recommend if you have somehow not read Harry Potter. The movies are also really good, so I do recommend. Next up, we have Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Now, although I would recommend Sarah J. Maas as a whole, because she is like my favorite fantasy author, her books are just so much fun, I had to think of a series that would be the most fitting for the fall time. Oh shit, I grabbed the wrong book. This is like the prequel book. I recommend reading it first. I don't want to get into an argument about that though, because I know that a lot of people think differently. I just read the books in the order of events, like chronological order. Regardless, the series I personally think is the most perfect for fall out of all of her series. It's hard to give a premise because so many different things happen, but the premise of the first book, which is Throne of Glass, not this one. The loose premise of Throne of Glass is essentially a former assassin, the world's most notorious assassin, Selena Sardothian, is in prison in the salt mines of Endovier, and then she is taken out of the salt mines to compete in a championship for the king against 23 other individuals, and whoever wins is granted their freedom from prison and has to serve as the king's champion for, I think, 5 years or something like that, and then is granted her freedom forever. And then last but certainly not least, in the fantasy section of this video, I have City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. Now really all of Cassandra Clare's books, but there's like 15 of them, so I don't want to include them all in this video, and the order that they get read in is a little bit strange. You're supposed to read the first 3 books of the Mortal Instruments series, and then you're supposed to take a break and read the Infernal Devices, and then come back and read the last 3 books in the Mortal Instruments series. So my goal, at least for this year, is to hopefully finish the first 3 books so that I can get into the fun stuff, because I've heard that the Infernal Devices is like her best series, but I can't read it until I've read at least these first 3 books. So that is my goal. But yeah, I feel like the Shadowhunter series as a whole is just perfect for the fall time, so that is why I would recommend it. Okay, now we're moving into the mystery thriller horror category. So first up we have Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I have tried to read this book a number of times and then I just always end up putting it down, but I would really like to read it this fall time because I think it'll be very good. Also the cover is just like, it's creepy but it's pretty, if you know what I mean, so that's a good thing. This is more of a body horror, so it's kind of gnarly, and it is often described as a female version of Lord of the Flies, which was probably my favorite book that I read in my high school career for school. Essentially the premise of this book is that an all-girls school, a boarding school I believe, has been under quarantine for 18 months because of a disease or sickness that is spreading throughout and killing off all of the teachers. I'm pretty sure at the point that this story starts, all of the teachers have been killed off, and it's just the girls fending for themselves. And then our main character's best friend goes missing, and she has to try to find her and figure out what happened to her. So that's the general premise of this book. So I think pretty good for fall time given the school atmosphere and the horror aspects. Next up we have Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, and Mira Grant is actually an alias for Sheena Maguire. So little fun fact if you did not know. So this book follows our main character Victoria, who is a young scientist, and 7 years ago her sister went off on a voyage to film a mockumentary about like sea creatures from legend, I'm pretty sure, and that voyage never returned, so her sister has been missing for the last 7 years. But a new crew is being assembled and Victoria decides to join it, her motive being to try to figure out what happened to her sister. So it's a mystery, a bit of a horror, I think. I don't really know, but that's the premise, and that sounds really interesting, and I've heard really good things about this book from like one person, but I've still heard really good things about this book, so I'm interested to read it. Next up we have The Wives by Taryn Fisher, and this is a psychological thriller. It follows our main character Thursday, who is married, and her husband has 2 other wives that she is fully aware exist, and she is in an agreement that he is allowed to keep these other wives. They're just not allowed to know any details about each other, and they're never allowed to meet each other. However, as the story unfolds, she discovers more and more details about the other wives and her husband that lead her to believe that he may not be who he says he is. So I actually already read this. I read it when I was like 16, I think, when it came out in 2019, and then I just reread it like a month ago, and I don't know, it's just kind of a fun psychological thriller. It's not super like on Shutter Island's level or anything, but it's still pretty good. Next up we have The Gracier by Kim Liggett, or Liggett. Probably not Liggett. That sounds weird. I don't really know, but regardless, is actually sort of a dystopian body horror type deal. I don't know, creepy. Essentially every year all girls that have celebrated their 16th birthday are sent away. They're like banished from town until their next birthday, or for a full year until they come back. And essentially the whole point is that they're expelling their dark magic into the universe so that by the time they come back, they're pure and they're ready for marriage. And the story follows one of these 16-year-old girls named Tierney, I believe. And I read this last fall time, and I'm pretty sure I gave it like 3.5 stars. It was pretty good. It wasn't like the best thing in the world, definitely not my favorite dystopian, but I think it is probably the most perfect for fall. Next up, we have Bunny by Mona Awad. I read this again like 5 years ago, and it was not my favorite, but I did want to include it because it was like pretty creepy, and if this is the kind of book that you like, then I think that you would enjoy it. It has very flowery writing that you have to use a lot of brain power to understand, but essentially the premise is it follows the main character, Samantha, I'm pretty sure is her name, and there's like a cult-like sorority of girls who call each other Bunny, and she starts hanging out with them, and I don't know, it like creepy stuff happens. I don't even really remember. I don't even know how much of a premise this book has, but it is creepy, so I'll give it that. So if you are interested in that, then I would recommend, but I don't think it's one that I would reread, but I do like the cover, so I've kept it on my shelves. Probably not the best reason, but you know, at least I've read the book. It's not just sitting there untouched because I like the cover. So there's that. Next up, we have a little bit of like a YA mystery series, and that is the Charlotte Holmes series by Brittany Cavallero. The first book being A Study in Charlotte. Basically, it follows Charlotte Holmes, who is a Charlotte Holmes, who is a descendant of Sherlock Holmes, and Jamie Watson, who is a descendant of James Watson. Anyway, they go to prep school together and they absolutely hate each other's guts until one of their classmates ends up being killed under unusual circumstances, and they end up being framed for the murder. And then they end up having to team up and work together to solve and figure out what really happened to this classmate. I don't think that this is the kind of book that would be like, oh my god, my favorite thing in the world. I have not read it, but I think it would be very fast-paced and fun to read in the fall time, so that is why I included it in this list. Next up, we have a series of interconnected standalones, and that is, I don't even know what the series is called, but the first one is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This story follows 17-year-old Audrey, who is this daughter of a lord, and she's interested in like forensics and things like that, and her uncle has a laboratory and he works in that field, so behind her father's back she will sneak into her uncle's laboratory and study and investigate different crimes and things, forensic medicine, that sort of thing. And one of the cases that she ends up studying is the Jack the Ripper case in like 1800s London. I'm pretty sure this story's set, that would make sense, and she ends up falling in love with Jack the Ripper. That's all that I really know about it. It's the first in a series. Actually, I don't even know if they're interconnected. They might just be standalones that are part of the series, if that makes sense. The first one being Stalking Jack the Ripper. I don't even know how many there are, but I have 4 of them. And then I have Hunting Prince Dracula, which would also probably be good for the fall time. They'd probably all be good for the fall time, realistically. And then Escaping from Houdini, and then Capturing the Devil. So those are the books that I have in that little series. Oh, okay, I don't want this to knock my tripod down. Well, it hit my tripod anyway. Oh no, my laptop, which has all my notes on it, just went dark. Everything is going wrong. Oh my god, no. That was all of the books in the horror mystery thriller genre. Now I have like the 2 little outsider that didn't fit into either category. The first one being My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Now this is a little bit of a darker story in like a real life sort of way, so if that's not something that you're interested in, or if the particular topic is not something that you would like to read, then I would recommend probably skipping this one. But basically the premise is this 15-year-old girl is manipulated into an affair with her 42-year-old teacher, so like dark stuff that actually does happen in real life. And now the events that occurred with the teacher happen in the year 2000, and then it fasts forward, it jumps back and forth between the year 2000 and the year 2017, which is now when she is no longer in this relationship with her teacher, but allegations are coming out, and this girl who is accusing him of an inappropriate relationship reaches out to Vanessa, the main character, obviously, to ask her if she would be willing to come forward, and Vanessa has to sort of decide whether she wants to come out or not, and like she just deals with like an internal struggle because she doesn't really know what to do because her feelings about the situation are still sort of conflicting. So that's the premise of this book. I can't really explain why I think it would be good for fall. I just feel like it's very melancholy and like just the kind of thing that would, I don't know how to explain it, but this is a recommendation. And then last but not least, I have A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I have wanted to read this book for so long, but I have not yet. And I will either read it by the end of the year, and if I have not read it by the end of the year, it'll be the very first book that I'm reading in 2025. I swear on it, it's happening. It's just happening. I have not watched a single person read this book without bawling their eyes out, and I'm not saying I want to have that experience, but I'm curious about why people are having that experience. So I'm very intrigued to read this book. This book essentially follows 4 college classmates who move from Manhattan to New York, and they're very broke, and the only thing fueling them really is their friendship and their ambition for more and to make their own way in the world. We have Willem, who is an aspiring actor, and then we have JB, who is a painter, and then the summary doesn't really talk about Jude, who is our protagonist, and sort of what his aspirations are. The only thing we know about him is that he has suffered a lot of childhood trauma that is explored in this book, which is very sad. And yeah, it basically just discusses topics of childhood trauma and addiction and things like that. So I would be intrigued to read this book, and something about it, I think it's the black and white covers that just feel like fall. They feel like not dark academia, because I don't think that that's what these books would be described as, but like dark academia aesthetic, if that makes sense. Okay, so that is all for the books. Now we're getting into things to watch. So I'm going to start off with movies. Now, obviously, any of the books that I mentioned, if they have a movie/TV adaptation, I recommend them. Like Twilight, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. Those are some awesome movies to watch during the fall time. They're really atmospheric. Now, in no particular order, I'm going to get into the actual movies that I would like to recommend. So the first one is Little Women, and that is the 2019 version. Little Women follows 4 sisters in the years after the Civil War. Jo lives as a writer in New York. Amy lives as a painter in Paris. Meg is married to a school teacher, and then Beth develops an illness that ends up ultimately being the thing that brings the sisters back together and helps them rekindle sort of a relationship, and the movie explores that. I've not read it. I mean, it is a book, but I've not watched it. Next up, we have Practical Magic, which follows Sally and Gillian Owens, or Gillian Owens. They're sisters. I haven't actually watched the movie, but I would like to this year. So this is not only like a TBR/book recommendations, this is a movie recommendation / TBW, if you will, to be watched. Anyway, these 2 sisters have been born into a family of magic. However, they have somehow managed to avoid witchcraft pretty much their entire lives. That is until one of the sisters' boyfriends passes away, and then they give themselves a crash course on witchcraft to try to resurrect him. So I would like to watch it because it has Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock in it, which can't be a bad thing. Next up, we have the Scream franchise as a whole. There are 6 movies, and then I'm pretty sure there's a 7th one coming out. Or maybe it came out recently, I don't know. And basically they are mystery, like murder mystery / slasher films, as I'm sure most of you know. The premise of the first movie is essentially that it takes place 1 year after the teenage protagonist's mother is murdered. This masked killer is targeting this teenager and her friends using scary movies in a sort of twisted game. So that is the loose premise of Scream, even though I'm sure that you probably know what the Scream franchise is about in general. So there it is anyway. Step is You've Got Mail, which is a rom-com, and it's actually perfect for people who love to read because the premise is that a tiny little indie bookshop owner is struggling, and then a chain bookstore owner moves in across the street from her, and they hate each other, essentially. But then they end up meeting online anonymously, and they have an online dating sort of romance, and neither one of them knows the other person's identity. And then I'm sure that it becomes uncovered. And then we have When Harry Met Sally, which is another rom-com. The story starts in 1977 when 2 college graduates named Harry and Sally share a car ride from Chicago to New York, and on this car ride they get talking and they have a disagreement about, and like a conversation / argument about whether men and women can really have solely platonic relationships without any feelings involved. And then 10 years later, they run into each other in a bookshop and they decide to become friends to figure out whether or not men and women can really only be platonic friends. Next up, we have Corpse Bride, which is a Tim Burton film. So obviously pretty much any Tim Burton would be perfect for this list. It follows Victor and Victoria, who are being arranged for marriage. They both like each other, but Victor is feeling a little bit nervous about the ceremony, so he goes into the woods and starts practicing his lines for the wedding when a tree branch turns into a hand, which grabs him and pulls him into like the underworld or hell or like the land of the dead or whatever you want to call it. And that hand actually belonged to a girl named Emily who passed away right after eloping with her husband. She wants Victor to marry her, but Victor doesn't want to, so he has to try to make his way back up to the main world so that he can make sure that he can marry Victoria before she ends up marrying the villain Barkis, or whatever his name is. I think it's Barkis. I'm sure you know what Corpse Bride is about. Next up, we have Hocus Pocus, which you probably know what Hocus Pocus is, so I will just like keep it brief for those of you that don't know what Hocus Pocus is. A teenage boy and his little sister end up moving to Salem. He's having a hard time fitting in, and then he ends up waking up 3 witches who were killed in the 1700s during the Salem witch trials. Yeah, that's the loose premise of Hocus Pocus. Obviously perfect for Halloween. Next up, we have Coraline, which is like my favorite animated movie of all time. I have a Coraline tattoo. Basically, the loose premise of this movie, which I highly recommend that you watch because it is one of my favorite movies, probably my favorite animated movie, like I just said. Coraline is exploring her new home. She doesn't want to be there. She's upset. And then she ends up coming across a tiny little secret hidden door. And on the other side of that door is an alternate universe or an alternate reality of her life, which is seemingly much better than the life that she really does live. At night, she goes through the door and she hangs out with her other family until the other family decides that they want to keep her there forever, and then she decides that she doesn't want that and she wants to get back to her real life. They're trying to trap her, so she has to figure out a way that she can get back to her other family, like her, not her other family, but like her normal family. I watch that movie probably like 6 times a year. I absolutely love it. Next up, we have Hacksaw Ridge, which is like my favorite live action movie. I just wanted to include it on this list because it's my favorite live action movie, and I feel like war movies remind me of the fall time. I don't really know why that is. Hacksaw Ridge is based on the true story of Desmond Doss, who was a conscientious objector in World War II, which basically means he refuses to pick up a gun, to use a gun on anybody on the battlefield. Desmond Doss won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his service in the Battle of Okinawa, where he saved 75 people, 75 men, without firing a single bullet. And it is just like my favorite movie. I just watched it a couple months ago with my boyfriend for the first time because he had never seen it, and he agreed that it is a very good movie. Next up, we have Silver Linings Playbook, and character Pat loses his job and his wife, and he ends up spending some time in a mental institution. Then when he gets out of the mental institution, he lives with his parents for a while, but he wants to get his life back in order and he wants to get his wife back, and he doesn't really know how to do that until he runs into Tiffany, who is played by Jennifer Lawrence, one of my favorite actresses, of course, and she offers to help get him reconnected with his wife in exchange for him doing something for her. And then we have Beetlejuice, which is obviously a Tim Burton movie as well, perfect for Halloween. And the new movie Beetlejuice came out, which was a continuation of the first one, so I would highly recommend watching the first one and then going and watching the continuation, whether it's still in theaters or not, or like once it comes to streaming, which I'm sure it will, or like rent or buy or whatever. I highly recommend. I really liked it. The premise of the first movie, though, is that the spirits of a deceased couple are harassed by a family that has just moved into their house, and they hire a malicious spirit to try to drive the family out. I'm sure you've seen Beetlejuice, especially with all the hype around the new one that was just released, but in case you haven't, I do recommend it for the fall time. Next up, we have Good Will Hunting, which follows our protagonist Will Hunting, who is a janitor at MIT. However, he has a gift for mathematics, I'm pretty sure, and he seeks out a psychologist to try to like figure out what he wants to do with his life. And that's really all that I know about it. I have not actually watched it, but I would like to watch it this year. Next up is one that I actually watch 2 times a year. I watch it every year around Halloween, and then I watch it every year around Christmas, and that is The Night Before Christmas, which I'm sure it's another Tim Burton movie, and I'm sure that you know the premise, but in case you don't, Jack Skellington is king of Halloweentown, and then he discovers Christmas Town, and he decides that he wants to bring Christmas to Halloweentown because he likes Christmas. So yes, that's all that you really need to know. Next up we have Frankenweenie, which is a really cute movie that I remember watching as a kid, but I have not watched since it came out in like 2012, I'm pretty sure. Frankenweenie is about a boy whose beloved dog passes away, and then he tries to perform a science experiment to bring his dog back to life. So super cute, heartwarming, a little bit sad. And then we have It, which I would include the original and the remakes. The original is super nostalgic for me. I used to watch it every fall. And then honestly, the new one is kind of nostalgic for me too, because it came out I think when I was in 7th or 8th grade, and my dad and I and my friend went and watched it in theaters, and it was a really good memory for me, and I really do like the remake. Also have not read the book, but I would like to read the book, but it's just so long. So I recommend the movie because the movie is not as long as reading that book would take. Or movies, if you don't know what it's about, you probably do. It's set in the summer of 1989, and it follows a group of outcast kids who work together to try to take down this shape-shifting monster who disguises itself as a clown to prey on children in the town of Derry, which is in Maine, I think. Next up we have Halloweentown. I'm sure everybody knows what Halloweentown is, and I'm sure everybody's watched Halloweentown. But yeah, essentially a young girl discovers that she's a witch, and she works to try to help save a town, Halloweentown, full of other supernatural creatures. Last like individual movie that I have on this list is Monster House, which is another one that I have not watched in a very, very long time, but I would love to revisit. It follows 3 young kids that believe that the house across the street is something that comes to life and has goals to hurt them, but no adults in their life believe them. So they decide to take matters into their own hands because Halloween is approaching and they don't want trick-or-treaters to meet a grisly fate. So they try to work together to destroy the monster house, or tame the monster house, or make it so that it doesn't harm those children. So yes. And then next up we have sort of a group of films, and that is Studio Ghibli films. My boyfriend and I are currently watching one every single night so that we can work through all of filmography. Primarily Hayao Miyazaki, but other films are really good for the fall time. All of them give cozy vibes that would be perfect for the fall time, but the ones that stick out to me include Kiki's Delivery Service, Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, Grave with the Fireflies. Grave with the Fireflies is really dark though, so if you don't want to be extremely sad, I would not recommend watching that movie, but it is very good. And those are like the 4 main ones that I would recommend from Studio Ghibli. And then moving on to TV shows, I only included 3 TV shows because these are like my top 3 favorite fall TV shows. The first one being Gilmore Girls. Everybody puts this on like what to watch in the fall time lists, but that's because it's like so accurate. It's so perfect for the fall time. This is my first year watching Gilmore Girls, and I cannot believe that I have just avoided it because I didn't really understand. People would describe it and I would be like, that doesn't really sound that interesting, but then I just put it on in the background because everybody was like, no, you don't understand, it's like the perfect coziest fall vibes. And I was like, okay, well, if you say so. And then I just put it on and I got completely sucked into it. I absolutely love it. The small town vibes, it is so cozy. I would highly implore you to watch Gilmore Girls if you have not. And then next up we have Stranger Things, which I actually have only seen the first 3 seasons. When I say that I was so obsessed with Stranger Things season 1 when it came out, I watched it every single day because it came out while I was on summer break, I'm pretty sure, and I watched it every single day in the summer, all like 8 hours, because it was 8 episodes, 1 hour each. I would just sit and I would watch it every single day for like 2 weeks straight. But I was absolutely obsessed with the first season that came out, and then the second season just didn't really live up to the hype, and then I ended up going back and rewatching the first, second, and third season once the third season was out, and I think there's 5 seasons out now or something like that, or 4 and a 5th one coming out. I don't know. Regardless, I'm not up to date, so that is a series that I would like to revisit and finish this fall because I did really like it and it has good fall vibes. I feel like the 80s just remind me of the fall time, and I don't really know how to explain it. That's just how I feel. And last but not least, I have Supernatural on the list, which I am sort of passively watching through with my boyfriend whenever we feel like just putting a show on, which you probably know what Supernatural is, but if you don't, it's essentially just 2 brothers that travel around North America fighting different supernatural beings and like saving people from them while simultaneously looking for the thing that killed their mother however many years ago. So yes, I am so out of breath. I've been filming for over an hour because there were so many things for me to talk at, and there were so many things for me to talk about, so I know for a fact that my words are getting all jumbled and it's going to be very hard to edit this video. But nonetheless. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any other recommendations for me, leave them down below for myself and for other people, because I'm always open to suggestions. I'm always looking for new things to read and watch, of course. Other than that, I don't really have anything else to say, so thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you want. You don't have to, but if you want to, it would be greatly appreciated. And I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.